times. So right now concerning Israel, we're seeing this posturing both for peace because, the end goal is to, well, not the complete end goal, but the enemy is trying to position Israel to have to take this covenant with death, to have to take this Daniel 9:27 covenant that God hates. And so the enemy is positioning her to do that, but then we also see the positioning for war because we see these end time wars that are still going to play out. And this is exactly what we would expect to see lining up with biblical prophecy. It's actually helping us to understand that much more that what God told us is much better than any news. And everything is just lining up with what God said would happen. There's a peace still coming that God calls a covenant with death. And so we know Israel is being positioned to compromise. And we know Israel, God makes no bones about that when Israel comes back into her land, that she came back in unbelief. That she came back not at, she doesn't know him yet. It's going to take Jacob's trouble. It's going to take the tribulation for Israel to find him. And so this covenant with death is going to seal in a short-lived false peace, at least for Israel, where she will at least feel like she is at peace, that she can take a breather. And there are also wars that the Bible says will take place leading up to and in and through the tribulation period. So we're seeing those things position right now. And as we look at what the Bible has to say about these last moments and how today's events are leading up to the final 7, it's important to remember the severity of what is happening in Israel. I think we can just become numb to it because it's not happening to us. We're not living underneath the threat of a 7-front war. We're not living underneath the threat of having to run to bomb shelters at a moment's notice. But they're being attacked by a demonic force that's influenced by Satan. And this is going to get worse before it gets better. It's going to get worse. It's going to get a false better, and then it's going to get worse again before Jesus comes back, which is when the only time it will actually end. And so this is no ordinary war. As horrible as wars are, this is something more sinister because this is the enemy's goal. The enemy doesn't want to just exterminate Israel, although he does want to do that. He wants to completely murder all the Jews. But he also wants to slap God in the face by fooling Israel. He wants to be the one that has Israel commit idolatry with him rather than God. That's why it's so important for Satan to have the Antichrist and he will possess the Antichrist and then go and sit in the holy place. Because he wants to be that. He wants to be in that position where they are committing idolatry with him. Completely, and that's when the last 3.5 years really erupt. And so keep in mind that the Bible says the solution will be a false peace. The solution that Israel will cling to. With all these wars coming, with Israel's going to be backed in the corner, and the Bible tells us their false solution is going to be this covenant with death. It's going to be this false peace that we see in Isaiah 28. Israel will end up feeling comfortable, and she'll let her walls down as prophesied by Ezekiel 38. And she's going to let her defenses down. She's going to feel like she can rest. So we need to keep biblical eyes on this as we watch these events, and we push against believing the narrative that's given by the world media, because the world media is going to, of course, push a very different different narrative. Of course, the world media isn't going to line up with the Bible. And so we see here, US, Israel should probably join up to destroy Iran's nuclear program. And so that may be what happens. And again, a lot of this is really posturing Israel to put her trust in nations, to put her trust in covenants and in an agreement with nations, and eventually with the man of sin, to where she'll be putting her trust not in God, but in a covenant with death in order to avoid the overwhelming scourge. And so you see movements here that are really more about positioning her for that. So as the world prepares for World War III, the second blood moon Purim eclipse will appear. So last Purim, there was a blood moon eclipse. This Purim, there's a blood moon eclipse. And next year, so 3 in a row, blood moon eclipse on Purim, which is interesting. It's interesting. Here, these 3 years in a row, and also these being 3 years that are really painted as war. These are war years. October 7th. Now, this one is specifically over North America, being the greatest view of it. And so that's interesting too, being that we're about to get into some wars. So there are at least 3 main wars we see involving Israel in these last days. There's Psalm 83, involving Israel's immediate neighbors and the terrorist groups that are around her right now. There's Ezekiel 38 that appears to happen after Israel is in peace. I believe that happens during the first 3.5 years of the tribulation. And then there's Armageddon, which is the final war that Jesus returns to save Israel in the midst of. So Netanyahu at IDF ceremony, Israel will achieve victory over Iran and its proxies. And I believe that's absolutely true. I think that right there is Psalm 83 war, that Israel will achieve victory. The IDF will achieve victory over the Iranian proxies, and then Iran will come in with Russia, with vengeance, with Ezekiel 38.